Welcome to the Earlier Spark podcast. I'm Tati Bueno, and I'm here with my co host and friend.
Constantina Moustaka. Hello, everybody.
Today's episode is about art. And for those who know me, knows that I've always been very artistic and very into art. But today, the art comes with a twist. Constantina, do you want to tell people what's the twist?
Yes, the twist is that Anna Reyner is talking about trauma informed art. And she's talking about how important that is for the children who are struggling with emotions to have art available in their place, in their setting. She's talking a lot about art in early years, the importance of it, and she is brilliant. We loved talking to her, didn't we?
It was just beautiful. She has this calming voice and energy. It was just so nice. And to hear her talking about how can we support children through art and how art is just not those tabletop activities where everybody does the same. And that from something that we see that's picture perfect on Pinterest, that I know a lot of people take inspiration from because I used to as well. But art's about
It's the
inhabiting
process.
the
It's the
body and
process.
the process. Exactly.
It's all about the process.
She also wrote a book about trauma informed art.
In early childhood, yes. So have a look if you want to buy it. And it has all the information you need in
Yeah.
there, the ideas and strategies of
So without further
to use.
ado, enjoy part one and we'll see you soon.
See you soon.
So, Anna, do you want to start telling us why is art so important, but especially in early years, in early education?
Yeah, absolutely. That's such a great question. And art is so important for people of all ages, and art is so misunderstood. Unfortunately, a lot of us think art is just what hangs on a gallery or what's put in a frame. But everyone has an artistic side to them. We're born with creativity. We're all born with the impulse to express who we are and celebrate who we are. And art gives us a vehicle to do that. And I really hope to open up people's minds about what art is. And you're more artistic than you think, probably. And children know that. Children express themselves freely given the opportunity. So you don't have to tell a child, what art is. You just give them the materials and they'll show you what art is. I think a lot of us know what Picasso said. Picasso, one of those artists that people, think, well, that's art, what Picasso can do. But what he said is that I've spent all my life training myself to be a great artist, the best artist possible. But really, what I want to do is get back to how I was an artist as a child, because it's children who really know how to express directly. All of that art that comes first, the 0 to 3, when children can first have a grasp to even hold a pencil or a marker or a crayon and make a mark, all of those things are so important because it's the child's first communication. It's their language. It really is a language. Art is a child's first language. Certainly one of the first, and I would argue to say the first, because it documents things that can be held and seen later. So you can see a child's their energy level, for example. And you can see whether they choose a wide range of engagement. Motorically, of course, you can tell, whether they scribble a lot or scribble a little, but also just how they respond. You can look at the behavior that they have, because art, in a way, is that serve and return that we talk about with infants. A lot of times that term, it's like cause and effect. Like, I look and I smile at you, and you smile back at me. I say something to you and you respond to me. And even though when you're in child development, that's so obvious to you, you're like, you know, like, why
Yeah.
are you even saying that? But yeah, of course, duh. But, there are parents, including educated parents, who actually believe that why talk to your child when they're an infant? Because they don't know what you're saying. And it's like, I've actually had people say to that, oh, that's right, I'm supposed to talk to my infant, even though, yes, because it's like, hello, and you smile because that servant in return is part of the attachment.
Mhm.
And, the bond, the building of trust and safety, and that the child is not alone in the world. And when it comes to art, there's a different kind of serve and return because the child makes a mark, sees the effect of their action, And then they're like surprised, first toddlers, when they first do that, it's like, wow, it's very powerful. Wow, look at that. I made that. And then you can do it again. And then you could try it a different way. And it's like, wow, look what I'm doing. That serve and return is just very, very empowering for a child. And so I encourage parents to really pay attention to that and applaud it in a way. Just like, wow, look what you did. What would you like some more? Let's try some bigger paper. You want to try it again?
And I think practitioners as well, because that will bring us to the next question about product versus process, because that's a big debate here as well.
Oh
Like,
my gosh,
Oh
that's
my God.
the big thing. That's the
I'm
thorn
trying,
in our side.
Yes, it
with
is.
practitioners, I'm struggling all these years to just tell
Oh,
them how valuable the process is, and that we don't care about the product, and like in the way that you think the product is, and not the way that it should be.
it's so true. It is like that's the one thing that I think needs the most continued instruction. And I try to find different portals, ways to make that message clear to practitioners because so many are still what I call old school. It's like the
Yes.
old-fashioned way of teaching. Do you remember the time that I literally, when I was a teacher, I remember one time literally standing over that Mimeo machine, which you would have to, it had like this ink smell and you would like create new things. And it was like there was a time that academics, I know in the US academics, like children were not reading at third grade adequately. We weren't competing in the world market of being like decent educators, and we were really failing our children. And so the idea trickled down to, well, let's teach the preschoolers how to read and write then, as if that could be done,
Yeah.
and as if that was appropriate, right? Like let's start earlier. And so there's this old school way that we know now is most people know that's totally inappropriate. And I think it's almost like doing a product art, say it's spring now here. I think it's spring where you are too, right? Flowers everywhere, butterflies. So it's a time people think, oh, I can do that butterfly art with the clothespin and the coffee filter. I
Yes.
love that. And the parents love it. And oh, we can do the turtle. We can bring out all those spring that like maybe the ladybug out of the paper plate, and we can bring the oogle eyes out and the pipe cleaners, and everybody's going to have their own ladybug. And it's like, oh, that is so old school. It is so old school. One thing I like to say is early childhood educators balk at the fact that we are considered babysitters. Those are the things, let the babysitters do that. Let auntie or grandma, people who don't know child development, let them do the little, craftivities or whatever you want to call them. I call them craft projects. It's so not art. Call it a craft project.
Yes.
Because that's good for problem solving, following directions. It's good for getting a result that people applaud, but unfortunately, then they usually say, my child is an artist. Then the world thinks that's art. And so they're like, oh, it's such a great artist. Look at his turtle. There's so much education. And I always say, okay, that's old fashioned. You
Yeah.
want to be modern, not modern in terms of trendy about, clothing or what you think of modern thinking, but you want to have a growth mindset and all those things that we know because they make common sense. Like child directed children need to be empowered.
Yeah.
That old adage that children are candles to be lit and not vessels to be filled.
Oh, lovely. Yes.
That's such a good one, right?
Yeah.
Because they
I
have it
love that.
there. They
Yeah.
have it there. They know, and a lot of adults have no awareness of how much children know.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
you also end up with the same product in, like, let's say you have 14 children, 14 same products, the same
Yeah.
thing. So you cannot
There's
see the
no
personality of the
individuality.
child. There's not, yeah, exactly,
Yeah,
isn't it?
14 turtles. Yeah, and
Exactly the
unfortunately,
same because they will try to make them exactly the same, otherwise it's wrong.
that's right. It's wrong. Right.
Yeah.
They didn't
Yeah.
quite do it right. In fact, one of the nice little quips in my book is if a child says, I can't do it right, which you'll hear, I can't do it right, or mine doesn't look right, which of course you hear from people of all ages, mine doesn't look like I can't do it right. You know that you need to shift your thinking and shift how you present it. Because if you present art in an open ended way, they're not going to be saying that. Or you can correct in a way, you can prompt and say, what is right here? It's about whatever you want it to be. There is no right. Yeah, it's one of the few areas that children really have control. And, little kids, they don't have much control over their life. They're just following along with what they have to do. This is a place they have choices.
So true.
That's so amazing. What should be a few do's and don'ts for teachers then when we're thinking about the process to value the process instead of the product?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think people need tangible things that they can just repeat, teachers, and so they can just sort of get in the routine of reframing their own way of thinking because they have probably a lifetime of thinking
Yep.
that butterflies are made out of this way or that way, that because that's the way they grew up. That was the old-fashioned way.
Yeah.
And their mom probably
Yeah.
has some of those things stored from their childhood that the mom is still keeping as so precious, and those are fun projects. I have very little to do with the child. So anyway, the do's and don'ts are really important, I think. Do take those product ideas that you love, whether it's the turtle, the butterfly, or the ladybug, and adapt them, morph them, modernize them. Because, nothing is black and white. Sometimes people say, oh, that means no product art. I believe, like, why be an extremist, right? Some programs in the United States, and you probably have them here, the Reggio Emilio or Waldorf, there's some programs that are really just completely open-ended. There's not a wiggle eye in the center. No wiggly eyes here. But I think that kids do love the turtle and those kinds of things. Just it's a different thing. So teachers also, that you've got too much on your plate. I'm already facing a universal trauma. Everybody's stressed out. The children are totally dysregulated. They're developmentally delayed. The pandemic has caused so much setback. And now you're asking me to transform my art program is one thing that I've relied on. I always do the same thing every spring, and I know the parents like it, and the kids do it. And I can't do that. Like, don't ask me to change more. So I think it should, that if you're going to transform your program into one that's more appropriate, more trauma informed, or more just development, more child centered, the one that the children are going to benefit from, just like one that's going to be helpful. If your art program is going to be helpful to helping children be ready for school, which is usually school readiness is the term we use all the time. Preschool should help children feel good about themselves, good about how the world accepts them, how they fit into the world with other people, and how do they get along. And, a little bit of structure and organization. So when they have to go to kindergarten or TK, they kind of have some familiarity. So they're starting with confidence. And, that's kind of the overall social emotional goal of preschool, I think. And so have your art program align with those goals. Why not? It's going to help you. Children are having a hard time getting to that goal anyway. So you've got crayons and paint and paper on your shelf. Use them. Learn a little bit about how to be more modern and appropriate.
Yeah, and it might take less of their time as well if you think about it, because it takes them so long to cut that shape of a turtle, to put the pieces together of what needs to be done for the product. It takes more time than just
Yeah,
letting
it
the
does
children
take more
express
time, and
feelings.
it's wasted time. That's what I
Yes,
like. You have too much important stuff to do. Your role now, especially the post-pandemic, your role is more important than it ever was. It
Mhm.
might be harder than it ever was, but the opportunity to make a difference in a child's life, which I think is why most people go into early education. It's the foundation. They like
Yeah.
the nurturing element of working with young children, and they want to make a difference in that child's life, because the trajectory of the young age, when your influence is very broad.
yes.
And research in the post-pandemic and how will children survive, children who grew up in the pandemic generation, who little children whose everybody was masked, so they couldn't even see they couldn't see the facial expressions.
Expressions, yeah.
They were like a fear, like, did you wash your hands? Did they sneeze on you? Did you touch it? Did you wash for 20 minutes or 20 seconds with soap? They grew up in this world of extreme caution. And so, helping them relax and, again, oh, I was getting to what is the research says, how are children going to survive? Like, what will the imprint of this be, 5, 10 years from now? Are they going to be like afraid for the rest of their lives? And the social researchers and neuroscientists, so far, the research has concluded by researching other extremes and emergencies that have happened over time and what were the outcomes of those, the children will adapt and probably, there will be scars, of course, but they won't have such a detrimental effect long term if and only if the next few years that the children encounter are healing. So this trajectory, we always knew the early years were the foundational years, but now they're the healing years plus the foundational years. And so even though early educators are leaving the field in droves because it is overwhelming and it's so underpaid and under-respected,
Yeah.
those that stay and those that are on the fence, say, yes, it's hard, but just hang in there a couple of years, do more process art, find out what a trauma-informed classroom is and implement more of that. Take care of yourself so you can co-regulate well. And you're a hero. You're the hero of the century.
Yeah.
And that's a nice position to be in.
Exactly. And you mentioned
I love that.
emotions and how is art supporting those emotions, and how is art supporting personal, social, and emotional development in the early years?
Well, there's a lot that can be said about that, but to simplify it, I would say one of the things I think that's most important is control. The children, want to develop a sense of that sense of personal agency, I think is what they call it now so often. It's like self-esteem, like that empowering thing that I'm valued in the world and I have something to offer. I have something to say, and I have something to show you about me and why I'm unique and what I'm thinking and feeling and who I am. And I think that gets to that thing about children are candles to be lit and not vessels to be filled. Because the old school way of thinking is kind of like children, there's not much there, and so we're going to fill them up with knowledge and information. But the lighting a candle is like, there's a lot there. It's kind of like children are born with all their brain cells, which is like a fascinating fact. What they don't have is the synapses, the connections. They're not connected. So yeah, that candle is, they have like billions of brain cells that they're born with. Yes, but connecting them, and the connections will say, do people like me? Is the world safe? And when I cry or when I'm hungry, will anybody be there to take care of my needs? And art gives that child, going back to total control. It allows the teacher or the caregiver or the practitioner to stop and say, I see you. I see you. Because, when you think of universal needs, not just even for children, but all of us as humans, we want to be seen, really seen for who we are. And art is a window into that world. And it allows the caregiver to pay attention to the child in a way that's real. So that's one of the things, but that's not the only thing. If you think of the body and the sensory nervous system, children really develop their brains through interacting with the environment. That's one thing the research shows us, that those synapses, the nerve pathways are created by physical experiences with the environment. So for children at home, it's playing with pots and pans, it's crawling around, it's just, hugging and tugging. When you go outside, you go to the playground, and then there's more stuff to interact with. And the art gives you a million things to interact with that you can see the result from. So glue, you can pour the glue, you can squeeze the glue. So you see what a squeeze does. You put some paper towel on top, you see what the paper does. It comes off on that, and then it comes off on your hand. So it's a little lab. It's kind of like I think of in chemistry when you go to high school and you have the chemistry lab. You got all the beakers and the petri dishes and the stuff to experiment with. It's kind of like a little safe, non-toxic science lab. And that's like the STEM to STEAM thing, that putting art in science, because it's cause and effect. What happens?
Yeah.
What's the properties of all these materials, And like just glue alone, and the difference in a glue stick, in tacky glue, paste, white glue, clear glue. You can make water it down with water and make it so it does on tissue paper. I mean, just glue alone is the physical properties of glue and paper are amazing. And paper comes from trees. Is that like
Exactly.
that's like who knew? There's so much to it. And so children not only have the ability to learn about these things, but have the sensory input. So when you
Mhm.
think of developmental delays, which is, I know one of the things that's always good to talk about is sensory processing, because some children do have sensory processing difficulties, and maybe they will be assessed with being on the spectrum or other things that are developmental things that have to do with their sensory nervous system. Even before you get to that more serious issue about sensory processing delays, children learn through their senses. The typical child who doesn't have those things will really gain a lot from getting glue on their hand and letting it dry and peeling it off. And
Mhm.
how many things in life have the opportunity to have so much knowledge in something so simple, so cheap, and so non-toxic? That's also fun.
Yes, true. True, so
And
true.
it's fascinating because then it ties into the cause and effect, but the senses and then the attention to what's happening to their bodies, right?
Absolutely. Art is a
And the
mind-body connection. It's like completely a mind-body connection. It's
yeah, and
called up
then
mindfulness, right? The mindfulness is such a buzzword. Yeah, but art
yeah,
fits right
yeah.
in with connecting the mind to the body.
Mhm. Can you explain to us how? How can art promote that connection and that understanding of one's body?
I think the how comes through the doing, because I think if you read the current neuroscience on like The Body Keeps the Score, which has been on the New York Times bestseller list for years, and many people have heard about that book. But even if you haven't heard about that book, which is by a neuroscientist, an MD, Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, it talks about the whole book and other books like it, and a lot of TED Talks about this, are that we used to think that early memories, early experiences, early childhood, like your life, your early life, impacted the rest of your life as a foundation. But we didn't realize, it's like your attitudes. What if you grew up seeing your father beat your mother, or you saw your mother lost in alcoholism and just passed out on the sofa every night, or all these traumas that are part of life. Or even
Mhm.
lesser traumas, like what if you grew up with poverty and you went to sleep hungry often? Those things would impact negatively your attitude about the world. And so a lot of the people thought that was all about your attitude about the world and yourself. But what neuroscience now tells us is, yes, that's all true. But what's also true is those memories are stored in the body, in your nervous system. Those are literally imprinted on your nervous system. It influences the immune system. It doesn't cause illness, but it influences illness because it influences our nervous system. There's certain conditions like asthma, that are associated. Scientists are finding more and more associated with that emotional baggage that we carry, the unfinished business. But we carry the unfinished business in our cells. One thing that I always suggest is more physical art, more gross motor art, because you want to engage the body as much as possible. And a lot of art is done at the table with just fine motor skills. And that,
Yes.
fine motor skills are important. But we want, like, the easel is one of the only places that universally the child is standing up and having those motions. But you want more of that stuff because you want to engage the body as much as possible. Then you activate that sensory nervous system. You have a chance over time of actually engaging, sort of expressing and expelling, kind of releasing some of those things that you've had a lid on, that your body has kept a lid on.
And it's funny that you mentioned that how we use it, the tabletop activities, let's say, and fine motor skills. Because from when I started in early education, that was always how art was done. Art is for fine motor skills and it's a controlled environment. Everybody's sitting at the table, and if a 2 year old can't sit at the table and do the art project, oh my god, it's the end of the world. When it's like, and I was
Yeah.
like, that's just so absurd, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. It really is. It's the end of the world, right? Because they must do what we planned for them to do. Oh,
Oh.
yeah. Yeah. So when I do workshops, and in my book, I have like over 100 illustrations and, sort of graphic information in the book, because I'm trying to get concepts that are easy to digest visually, like use your body a lot. So especially when I do trainings, I can have pictures of art where children are, painting with car wheels. There's certain, like, preschool 101, things that a lot of teachers know and others don't. But how to do big art, like what does that mean? Like, how would I do
Hmm.
that? I have no idea what she's talking about because I'm thinking about making a tulip because it's spring and I know how to make that tulip out of a paper plate and get out the yellow paint. So I don't know what she means about standing up and doing more art. How would I do tulips standing up?
Yes,
It's like
exactly.
I have no idea what you're talking about. And so it's a whole new way of thinking. But once you enter into that whole different way of thinking, it's like most teachers catch on pretty quick. I mean, most teachers are flexible thinkers. You have to be in order to be a
Exactly. To deal with.
you
We
know,
hope you are.
yeah, exactly. If you're not, you're leaving because it requires flexibility. Right? So most teachers, after one or two like attempts, they're like, "Oh, now I get it," and then the reward is like children will start to enjoy it more because they'll feel seen. If you do this just even for a few weeks or a few months, children will start to get on the bandwagon. Like, yeah, I want to be seen, and
Hmm.
I want to dispel some of this extra energy. I don't want to just contain it. Yeah,
From what I've seen in my practices as well, like with other colleagues, is that the children that are not interested in sitting at the table and doing the tulips. Oh,
yeah,
he's not interested in art. What are we gonna do? And then some children were forced to do it,
yeah.
or like, oh, he just doesn't like art. I'm like, that's not the point. He doesn't like what you think it's art, not art in general,
Exactly.
right?
But
It's just
nowadays, yeah.
That is such a good example, and if you don't mind, I'm going to use that one again in some of my trainings because I think that brings the idea home so well. That yes, you sit down with the tulip project, that you maybe even maybe even cut out the tulips out of yellow construction paper the night before, and then you put out some dot things for the kids to whatever to add a little bit of something. And then when they're not doing it, you think, now what am I going to do with, like, these two children don't want to do it. Now what am I going to do with them? Or what are they,
yep.
now they're just going to be disruptive. It's not working. They don't like art. I don't like art. Art never
But
works.
they will be disruptive because they are not interested in what
That's
you
right. So they're
just
like, don't make me do that. And the
yeah.
teacher says, she's trying to pressure them to get in there. And then, no, I don't want it. And so, yeah, so they get exasperated. The children are like, don't make me make tulips.
Yes, and art should be free. It shouldn't be molded in things that we want to
Exactly.
to put it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, and it is harder. Sometimes I think, making anything structured, like we all know, especially if you're a parent, that it's easier to do it yourself than to teach
Yeah.
your children to do it. Always easier. Like if you're going to have children help you with the dishes or whatever it is, cleaning up the room, you can certainly do it faster and better than training them, teaching them, nagging them, whatever, like basically educating them about it. And so teachers are stressed out so that just let me do the easy thing. But I think the art, open-ended art, really, really expressive art, appropriate art, child-centered art, art where the children really have a voice and feel like it's a creative, fun part of their day to be themselves. And
Mhm.
it's celebrated. All of those messages that the children receive, the children will loosen up, and they're also, smart, and they'll like, oh, this is a fun part of the day, and I can do
Mhm.
what I want. I don't have to do the tulip. I can do the this or the that, or I can do what I want. This is my time to express myself and have fun and explore and be curious, have my curiosity stimulated. A lot of those behaviors that you see, those frustrating, the acting out, responding to that inner fear and all the trauma that kids have been through that they're holding on to and don't understand, and oftentimes think they're the only one that feels this way. Yeah, they'll start to soften and feel safe. And, some of those disruptive response behaviors will drop off, and then things will be smoother. And, that's what you want.
Exactly. And with people who don't know what do we actually mean by trauma informed art?
I like to call it trauma with a small t because trauma has so much stigma and association still associated with it. I think trauma is oftentimes kind of like mental illness. It's one of those things that people don't want to talk about, think about, or ever. I don't want to even look at it because it's too scary.